Hello and welcome to Lesson 4, where we will be exploring the lives of women in ancient Greece. If you were a woman born in ancient Greece, your life would look very different to that of a man. From education and public life to who you would marry, options available to you would vary greatly depending on the social status and wealth of the family you were born into. Ancient Greece was famously an incredibly educated civilization that produced some of the world's greatest philosophy, art, and literature. But 99.9% of this great work was produced by men. When we do see depictions of women in ancient Greece, they are usually portrayed completing household tasks. That's because women and girls in ancient Greece were not allowed to attend schools or given a formal education. That's not to say that they didn't learn. Wealthier girls might have had tutors and anyone with a parent or friend who could read and write and that was willing to teach them could learn that way. So, it wasn't impossible or even uncommon to see a literate woman in ancient Greece. At school, boys would have learned much of what we learn in school today: reading, writing, math, music, and even physical education. They would also learn how to take part in democracy or learn a trade. Depending on social status, girls, on the other hand, would stay at home and learn about housekeeping and how to take care of a family, preparing for marriage, or they might shadow their mothers at work if their mothers were servants. Women in ancient Greece, regardless of their status, had far fewer rights than men. In addition to being unable to attend school, women weren't allowed to own or inherit land or property, or vote. The best most women could hope for was an informal education and a good marriage in which they were allowed or supported to pursue their interests. However, most wealthily married women did not enjoy such freedom. Many of them might even be considered as less free than poor or working women. Wealthy women, mothers, wives, and daughters, were generally not allowed to go where they pleased freely. They had to be constantly chaperoned by a male relative, which could be a husband, son, uncle, or brother. Many were not allowed to leave the house at all. Women would eat meals separately, and they would not be invited to the male dinner parties. They would live in a different part of the house. Poor and working women, on the other hand, were at least allowed to freely fetch water, shop for the family, and do other tasks, even though they might not always be safe while doing this. So far, as men were concerned, the role of woman was to serve and or produce children. Medicine was advanced in ancient Greece, and there were doctors and midwives available. But childbirth was still very dangerous for women, simply because the technology we have today did not exist. Complications during pregnancy or birth could be often devastating. Some gods, like Artemis, Aphrodite, Zeus, and Demeter, to name a few, were specifically worshipped for their healing qualities or for support in childbirth. When childbirth did end in the death of the child, mother, or both, it was usually the gods that were blamed, not the doctors or the midwives. If married life and motherhood wasn't appealing, another life path might be that of a priestess. Some women, usually those born from wealthy and prominent families, chose the celibate life of a priestess, dedicating themselves to a specific god. They never married or had children, instead choosing to serve their chosen god and temple their whole life. The life of a priestess would not have been that bad. Living accommodations, meals, and clothes would have been provided for you. There would usually have been other priestesses for company, and men would leave you alone. Priestesses were considered sacred, almost as property of the god they served. Attacking or accosting a priestess would be seen as inviting retribution from the gods. We might imagine cosmetics, perfume, and personal care to be modern inventions, but in fact, the ancient Greeks were famous for their hygiene. Ancient Greeks would take hot baths, either at home or in public bathing houses, and then lather themselves with olive oil. They also used fragrances, including palm, oil, mint, thyme, oregano, and various flowers. Herbs, flowers, and scents would be mixed into oils and stored in little pots and bottles. Olive oil is still used on skin and hair today for its moisturizing properties. Surprisingly, makeup was also a very popular product for the upper class of ancient Greece. Wealthier women would use olive oil and charcoal to darken their eyes and eyebrows. This is the equivalent of eyeshadow, eyeliner, and eyebrow pencils in our modern society. With light skin being desirable, ancient women sought to attain this status of beauty using white chalk and white lead to lighten their natural complexion. Today, women use foundation or even concealer. In order to maintain a soft, moisturized, and attractive look, women in ancient Greece mixed honey and olive oil to moisturize the skin. A modern example of this formula is the popular Burt's Bees. It's fascinating to think that the ancient poet Sappho, who lived in the 6th century BC, referred to a makeup bag in what is now known as Fragment 179, as translated by Anne Carson. Sappho is one of the most notable exceptions to the stereotypical life of a woman in ancient Greece. A famed poet, Sappho, was born to a wealthy family and learned to read and write. If she hadn't had a tutor, the world might never have discovered her. That's one of the biggest tragedies of ancient Greece. It produced some of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, and scientists, with only half its population. Imagine if the female half had been awarded the same opportunity as the male half, the wondrous heights they may have reached. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for next week's lesson, Family Life in Ancient Greece.